We'll talk about that.
It's quite poor. Have you
Yeah,
read?
music
Sorry.
taste is funny.
Yeah.
No, I haven't read that. No, I
This,
haven't.
I mean, and it's an expensive book, and I don't know if there'll ever be I think it's about 40 quid, something like that. And then there's a signed version, which is even more. I,
Yeah, but not signed by the person it's
no,
about.
but
That's the
exactly. It's
thing.
not, yeah, actually, if it was to be signed by Mark, it would be absolutely incredible. But yeah, um, I think it gives real insight. I mean, clearly Ben Wardle is an app is he's opened those doors that other people have tried to do, and he says that in the beginning of the book. I mean, just to give you a little bit of background to it, it goes into an awful lot of detail about how the records were made. Some of that would obviously come from Phil Brown because I know that I think you've read Phil's book. Did I read somewhere that you
I
read?
know Phil's book, but I
Yeah.
mixed solace with Phil,
Right. Yeah. So you'll have had those
so I know
those
Phil.
stories
I
Phil
know Phil
Brown.
very well,
Yeah.
and I've had quite a few chats with him about the method and things, which has
Yeah.
been quite a privilege.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, which I think is absolutely awesome. So but I mean, and Mark doesn't come across as a particularly nice person, which surprised me. And my wife kept saying, you know, because I don't really do the fanboy thing with anybody, but the closest to that would be talking Mark Hollis's music. So, am I an obsessive to some extent? Probably. And my
I think
wife
he's
kept saying,
interesting because he withdrew from it all and wasn't one for many interviews. I think that makes him mysterious and all the more interesting
yeah,
for it. And I think the fact that he's now sadly passed on means that there's a kind of cult uh, of of mystery, I guess, around him now that's kind of permanent.
yeah,
And I think it's understandable that I think there's been a few books. There's been a French book as well about Mark that's come out in the last year. Um, but I'm similar to you. I'm not really. I'm. I find I've been privileged, I guess, in as much as I've been working with so many people that knew him well,
yeah,
and I've got insight from them that I guess having not read the Perfect Silence book, I don't know whether how similar those insights are to what is it Ben Wardle,
Ben
is it?
Wardle, yeah, Ben
Yeah,
Wardle, yeah.
but what Ben found out. Um, but I feel like he withdrew for a reason,
Mm,
and I kind of feel like I, I haven't said this publicly, and people will disagree, and that's fine. But I think let the sleeping dogs lie. I think that to
yeah,
pry into somebody who didn't want to be pried into is almost disrespectful, to be honest.
yeah.
And I don't feel comfortable about the book. I don't feel
Okay.
comfortable about talking too much about Mark as a person, even though I know quite a lot now.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't feel like it's my place or anyone's place to talk about someone who deliberately
Mm.
withdrew. Now, that's not to say that people aren't entitled to be interested, especially in the artist, the man as an
Yeah, yeah,
artist.
exactly.
But,
Yeah.
but some of the sort of talk I've seen around the book, which is kind of like, who was this man and what he left a silence for a reason, and I don't think that should be uh, prized open and kind of tried to be filled with anything personally, which is why I haven't read it.
Right. I see. Yeah, that's a really valid point. I mean, I have to say, you know, like I said, my wife was saying, does it colour your view of of Talk and Mark, and no, it doesn't, because for me it's not about. I never met the guy, and I would have liked to meet him. Would we have got on? Who knows, um, you know,
Yeah.
yeah,
Would he have liked my music? I don't know. Would
yeah,
he have
exactly,
liked what Held by Trees has done? I don't
yeah,
know, and I'll never know, and that's
yeah.
okay. And I think the question mark around his personality, we're we're all lots of people. We're
Yeah.
all different
And
as
we're all flawed.
to who we're with.
Yeah, yeah, we're all
And
flawed.
music was his, when he was at work making those records, he was focused on his art. And of course, there's times when anyone, whether it's an architect building a house or a cook making a meal or whatever it is, they're so focused that that sort of common courtesy and polite talk and whatever isn't what they've got time or energy for, so they're cracking on.
Yeah.
And but the thing is with Mark is that what I will say is that those people I've talked to who knew him well describe a very generous, very warm, very funny man.
Yeah. Actually,
my favourite thing about Mark is that he loved his family, and that he withdrew to give his children and his wife his full attention, and that gave him satisfaction. And I think that is as inspiring as any of his music.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And actually, to be fair, that does, because what Ben Wardle says, he says he's a complex person, as we all are. Everybody's got flaws. Everyone, there's positive and negative in every one of us, and he does say that. But he does say that he's, the fact that they would go to the pub after the sessions and things like that, and they wouldn't talk about music; they'd talk about football and stuff like that. So he was
a normal bloke, and I think what I will say also is that some of the magazine articles I've read where Ben has been involved to give him credit, he's sort of been quick to say that he's not buying into a cult kind of worship of somebody. He's describing quite a normal bloke, and I think a lot of these people, even people that like Prince, ultra kind of artists, if you like, there was a very normal side to them.
Well, there's always a perception that the person that you see, the famous person that you see, they're really like that. And in the experiences I've had of meeting people, famous people, they're never like that. They're actually sort of, they are, like you say, everybody's got this normal side to them,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I saw an interview with Paul McCartney. I think it was with Stephen Colbert on one of those chat shows in the States. And he's talking about how he knows he has to kind of be Paul McCartney.
Yeah, exactly.
The trademark. But that when he goes home and when he's around his family, he's just our Paul.
Yeah.
He thinks it's strange how famous this other guy, Paul McCartney, is. And he goes to Stephen Colbert, he goes, and he's really famous. and Stephen Colbert's like, he's Paul McCartney. Yeah. And it's almost like this kind of, I think a lot of people who establish themselves and become extremely well known for their thing, their art, they do have to have this persona that they put on to go and do that thing. And I think Mark was very anti that, from what I understand.
Yeah,
he was an authentic person. He didn't have those kind of different views of himself. He just saw a man doing his work, and actually that strikes a chord with what I understand of Damon Albarn, who's probably my favourite sort of songwriter and creative person, is that the Damon that you see, he doesn't have these different versions. He's just Damon all the time.
Yeah.
Now, I might be wrong, but I have met him, and I got to know people that know him well, and there's an authenticity about him that I find really inspiring. And I think, the kind of there's a lot of folk who, to function mentally and be healthy, they have to kind of have these. My wife's a therapist, She can't be who she is in the therapy room with us all the time. That just wouldn't work. So you have to have sometimes these kind of versions of yourself. And I guess some artists are exactly that way. I think, was it Bowie? You know, David Bowie was the guy that he was on stage and in the recording studio, but David Jones was who he was with his wife and his kids. And he was able to sort of distinguish very clearly the difference between Bowie and Jones.
So I'm just sorry, I just got a message saying that the Zoom meeting will end in 10 minutes. We'll have to start another one if we're going to.
Yeah, that's okay. That's fine.
Are you all right for time, by the way, David?
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's funny, isn't it? So where did the name Held by Trees come from?
The name Held by Trees was the project kind of began in the first couple of months of lockdown. I think it was April. Yeah, it was definitely April, and I been given permission by my lovely wife to bring some recording equipment home from my studio to work on music at home rather than at my place. So that I could concentrate mainly on educating the children, because she worked through it, whereas I was more flexible to do the home schooling with the kids. She said, "Oh, make sure you've got, you know, some stuff to disappear into when you need to give yourself a break." So I started to noodle around on my MIDI keyboard and programmed in some drum patterns and some chords, which became In the Trees, Rain After Sun, and Mysterium. And I thought, I'm definitely leaning into my love of Spirit of Eden and Late Talk with the vibe here. At the same time, I was having some life coaching, which is quite a lot like counseling, but it's a bit more directive, with a wonderful woman called Emma. And I was describing to her through this sort of the sessions we were doing on Zoom about how I'm 6'5", so I'm a really big guy. And I'm often the one hugging the other person. They kind of tuck in under my chin, and I feel like I'm the hugger rather than the huggee, that I'm holding the other person. I'm never the one being held. Yeah. And we were sort of working through that. And she said, "Well, why don't you climb some trees and feel held by the trees? They're bigger than you."
Wow.
And so as a spiritual practice, I started to look for trees that I could climb up into and feel that heldness of something bigger than me, just taking my weight, holding me. And so this was happening at a very similar time. And, you know, that it also sort of ties in a little bit with the fact that the Talk records that I reference in particular, Spirit of Eden and Laughingstock, and they both have trees on the cover, done by James Marsh. So there's definitely a sort of connection there, but also actually in terms of my faith, trees are a motif that are used throughout Scripture. So there's the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and there's the kind of the cross, which is in some places described as a tree. So there's all these kind of mystical meanings attached to it as well. So there's a kind of three answers.
Oh, that's great.
Mainly it's about being held, and life on Earth is held by the trees and the oxygen that they give and the carbon that they store. So there's four reasons. And trees are just really important to me. My family have planted a woodland up in Wiltshire, which I've watched grow up sort of with me. They planted these trees in the early 90s when I was a nipper, and now they're really tall. You know, they've been a constant in my life. So there's just loads of different kind of attachments to trees and
what a lovely
meaning.
That's absolutely superb. That's brilliant.